Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Zach Metkler.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name's Joe Kuzma, and today I am rejoined by the professor of football, Zach Metkler. Zach, what's going on?
It's another busy day in the life of Zach Metkler. Nothing too much, though.
Another busy day. This man wears so many hats. And you know what? I really want to do like some cool thing like me and Brian do. We do like, I don't know, Step Brothers or Tom and Jerry or, Beavis and Butthead. He's Butthead, of course. And, when I think of you, I'm like, I can't put you in those same categories. I know you're like another brother from another mother, but I think of like Wayne's World. You at least be in the car partying with us, and doing the Bohemian Rhapsody thing.
That's good enough for me.
Head banging along. Speaking of banging my head, I see these mock drafts that are out there. I see some of the so-called draft experts, draft analysts, and all of these folks who just make some of the most ridiculous picks or insinuations as to what the Pittsburgh Steelers' needs and priorities are, not only for the offseason, but for the upcoming draft. The Steelers have 10 picks, a whopping 10 picks. More than likely, we're thinking that maybe 10 of those, let's put it this way, if they draft 10 players, I don't think there's any way that all 10 of those players make the roster and or even the practice squad. I don't think there's that many open spots on this roster. Do you?
I don't think so, especially because when you look at most of the fact that most of the picks the Steelers have are going to be in day 3. You have those 3 6th-rounders and a 7th-rounder. I mean, you could stumble upon the next Antonio Brown, Vince Williams, but you can't gamble on that. You have to expect your top guys to get the spots. And if you're not going to have those last guys either, even contend for a special team spot or an active roster spot, there's really no point. So I guys surprise you. This is a deep draft, but I'd be amazed if a late round pick actually ended up sticking with all 10 of them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's usually the case, even getting 6 or 7 players. I mean, that's one of the things where everyone's like, oh, Kevin Colbert, he doesn't know what he's doing. And it's like, well, you know what? He ended up with 10 picks. He got rid of 2 locker room headaches. It's going to create a ton of cap space in the near future here. He's got most of the core unit of the team still together. The guys replacing the 2 knuckleheads both made the Pro Bowl last year. I know some of it's popularity contest, but the numbers, the statistics, the performance is there to think that, they'll be able to replace that productivity of 84 and 26. So, speaking of, Ed Bouchette had just tweeted out not too long ago. Did you happen to see this, Zach? He said something. If I were the NFL schedule maker, I'd make the Steelers and the New York Jets the Monday night game right out the gate, get Bell while he's still out of shape and before he gets hurt.
I would definitely be all right with that.
Like, that would be pretty interesting. But, anyways, speaking of those, departures, a lot of people are just, they got to get another guy to go with James Conner because they lost Le'Veon Bell. Well, they didn't have Le'Veon Bell for all of 2018, and I think that turned out pretty good. Conner was, the October AFC Offensive Player of the Month. You had Juju, eclipse 1,000 yards, and his needle is pointing in the right direction there. So I mean, originally we were all thinking heading into the offseason that you got to replace Antonio Brown and what the big priorities are. But now, as we've kind of gotten through part of free agency, we see some of the Steelers signings, an extension with Eli Rogers, Dante Moncrief added to the team, Mark Barron, an inside linebacker, hybrid safety. Who else am I missing? Dan McCullers was brought back. Steven Nelson, the big signing at corner. I think that may shift a little bit it may shift some of the priorities. That's what we're going to talk about here, because at pick number 20, that's what we're really looking at is number 1 overall. Maybe we even kind of allude into maybe the day 2 picks, 2nd and 3rd round. What is a priority with the Steelers? And I guess going right out the gate to talk about this is myself and Brian, maybe about a month and a half ago, we asked what the priorities were on each side of the ball. So we're going to take a few positions here because I think, Zach, you could probably, let's take the ones, let's eliminate some. They're not going to, unless they use all 10 picks, unless they keep those picks. They don't use them for ammo to try and move up or maneuver around in the draft and, move up, move back, whatever be the case. Move back to get even more picks, but I digress. I don't think they're drafting a kicker, a punter, oh boy, a long snapper. That has happened, as crazy as it sounds. I think special teams off the board. I don't think particularly you're looking at a day 1 or 2 defensive lineman or defensive end unless it's somebody who's going to end up kicking out as an edge rusher. And I don't see running back as a major priority in quarterback. Definitely, I don't think they need anybody else there after spending some picks on Josh Dobbs and Mason Rudolph and Kevin Broback or whatever his name comes in, the Hard Knocks kid from the Cleveland Browns, who's actually he's pretty decent, at least when you're looking at the bottom of a depth chart as far as decent. I don't know that he's an NFL starter. So, I mean, I think they're covered at those positions. Would you disagree with any of that? Or you could always be a yes man too and just agree with me, make me look smarter than Brian.
No, I mean, I think the one spot you named that I think might still be on the radar would be D-line. I don't think necessarily it's going to be an early pick. I think if they were to keep all 10 of their draft slots, Javon Hargrave being in a contract year after this offseason, you don't know if there's going to be a long-term deal locked up with him. And I do like Dan McCullers more than a lot of fans do. I think Carl Dunbar did a much better job with him, kind of knowing how to coach him up. John Mitchell obviously is a all-world defensive line coach. He's a legendary D-line coach, but when it comes to some certain players, you need a certain type of skill to get the best out of them. I think Dunbar did that a lot with McCullers. I think realistically, though, you don't need the D end, because you have Tuitt and Hayward. They're not going anywhere right now. You have Alualu. LT Walton's obviously on his way out. I think they could do to add another body there, at least for competition's sake. They took that route with Josh Frazier, sex machine last year. And it ended up not panning out. He's barely panning out right now in the AAF, but it was a risk he had to take, and it made sense since Dunbar was his former coach. But I think they'll look at some D linemen. I mean, they've met with a couple guys at the combine. There's a rumor they're bringing in Emmanuel Turner from Louisiana Tech for a pre-draft visit this year. So there is some interest in D linemen based on the names that I've seen circulating around with them. None of them are going to be early picks. They're day 3 undrafted free agent type guys, but they're guys that I think they're showing they want to potentially upgrade if they can, or potentially prepare for long-term if they don't get a long-term deal with Hargrave. But I think Hargrave stays in Pittsburgh 2020 and beyond. I think they work a deal out there because I know we've talked about in the back rooms. Some people think that there's a higher market for him than there will be. I don't think there's going to be. I think he's a $3 to $5 million a year player. Maybe 6 if he has a breakout 2019. But I think D-line's the one spot you mentioned that they potentially could address at some point, especially if they do keep all 10 of their picks and don't make a move someplace. But of the other ones, I think they're pretty much done. Quarterback, like you said, Brogan Roback. I enjoyed watching him at.
I said his name completely wrong. I butchered it. That's right.
I might have as well, but he did really well with Cleveland last year in the preseason. I actually thought he was going to make the roster when it was all said and done as a number 3.
Yeah, me too.
But Steelers showed a lot of interest in him during that pre-draft process last year, so I'm not really surprised they brought him in here, and I think he'd be a solid practice squad candidate just to have an extra body there. There's not a whole lot of reps to go around if they keep all 3 quarterbacks again this year, but at least gives you competition and gives him an opportunity to showcase himself for other teams. But beyond that, I don't think tackle's a spot they're going to go with, especially when you have Andre Villanueva, Gerald Hawkins, Chuks Okorafor, Matt Filer. I mean, there's really no need unless you go for a guy that plays, guard and tackle just to give you more depth. And like you said, I think they could potentially look at a kicker or a punter to kind of give them extra competition. If they keep 10 picks, if they don't keep 10 picks, if they even lose one of them, I think it goes out the window. I mean, there's always draftable punters and kickers every year just to go along with the thought process that Kevin Colbert said a couple times about how they're going to bring in competition for Boz and Barry. But, I don't think that's a priority. I think you can find guys like that in free agency. You can find guys like the undrafted kicker, who's the number 2 kicker in this class that just doesn't get drafted because people don't take enough kickers. There's always going to be bodies to bring in there. So I don't think you necessarily have to waste the draft capital on it.
No, I agree with that. Let's. Well, I didn't even mention offensive line. You already jumped the shark there with the tackles. I mean, you see some of these mock drafts. I think they're just absolutely ridiculous. Assuming it's like, oh, well, it's Matt Filer, and who is he? Just because they don't know who he is, and then they just assume the Steelers didn't necessarily like their picks with Okorafor, and Hawkins has just been snake bitten with injuries. They spent the draft capital on these guys, so they would be there. They've been in the system. There's something to be said, at least being a pro for a few years on top of having a rookie. And Filer was pretty much the de facto starter last year, so in place of Marcus Gilbert. So, a lot of people talk about that too. It's like the same thing as losing Le'Veon Bell. Oh, what can they do? They lost Marcus Gilbert. Well, they didn't really have Marcus Gilbert last year either, so they saw what life was already like. It's the same situation as Villanueva versus Calvin Beachum a few years ago. You already got a glimpse at the future. You don't have to guess. So they know what they've got there. Now, yeah, you jumped into day 3, man. I was trying to ignore day 3s. I agree. I mean, with the defensive line, I mean, LT Walton probably won't be back unless they don't get something that they like in the draft. You mentioned Josh Frazier last year too, 7th round draft pick, sex machine because he wore number 69 that he does not wear in the Alliance of American Football. He got hurt, and I didn't get to see again if he's back on the field or not, or if he was a IR candidate or whatever be the case. He was with Birmingham, and so I mean, he's a guy that he has the pedigree of playing for Alabama in that defensive line. That's pretty much the reason he was getting drafted, and it also helps that his college defensive line coach is now the Steelers defensive line coach. So, those type of things happen. We used to see that all the time with Carnell Lake with some certain DBs that, caught his attention, didn't necessarily work out well, like Gerard Holloman, and there was Shaq Richardson is another one I think of, and those are the ones you're throwing the darts at late in the draft. And the same thing as you're saying, you're playing a gamble on, can you get somebody undrafted, free agent, bring them in, versus using, they got 3 6th-round draft picks, and then they have a 7th, so they have 175, 192, 207, and 219 overall. Sure, they could use that on a specialist. Maybe they don't need to. That's the risk you take, because if you don't use it, maybe somebody else does, or maybe the person just says, man, I don't know, I don't really want to live in Pittsburgh. It's cold there. They'd rather sign with the Dolphins or something like that. But don't forget, the Steelers still have Matt McCrane. They still have him under they signed him so it was more than just that week 17, but man, he's shaky. A healthy Boswell that maybe is mentally back on the top of his game is a Pro Bowl kicker. So we're talking about all these other things. I don't think they're going to draft a kicker. I don't think they want to eat Boswell's salary unless he's absolutely miserable in training camp. I think where you need to shift the focus to is what we were talking about, the crazy pick with offensive line. I don't think there's any way in hell that they use a 1st-round pick on an offensive lineman. I've already seen it in several mock drafts. I get the logic, but I just said what I said about Marcus Gilbert. I get Ramon Foster's getting old. Do they not understand what they just did with B.J. Finney here to extend him and keep him longer? And he's the guy that plugs in for Foster, but they have Foster and Pouncey. They got these interior guys. They're all locked up now. This offensive line's still intact, and you're looking to have Big Ben still there. You mentioned defensive line too, Tuitt and Hayward. I mean, these guys, they're still young. Hayward at 29 as a defensive end is still young. Tuitt is 25. I mean, exactly. and they're there through 2023 and 2021, and 2 of the highest paid players on the team. Well, actually 2nd and 3rd now behind Big Ben, now that you've got Antonio Brown off the roster. So Antonio Brown was the 2nd highest paid. And then you see where your money's spent. You got David DeCastro, you got Joe Hayden, Steven Nelson, and then Villanueva and Pouncey. And I mean, those are among your top guys that are being paid on this roster. So when I see where the money is a little top heavy, I don't know that they're necessarily going to be looking at an offensive lineman early on. I think they're going to be looking at some other positions. I know you're the offensive line guru. You like seeing lineman porn, so I'm going to let you beat your chest here for a second because I know you're itching to say something.
Yeah, I'm not a big proponent of taking offensive tackle early. I know I saw that one mock draft. I think it was Josh Norris's maybe, where he had the Steelers taking Greg Little 1st round. I know there's a lot of people that think he can bump down inside. If I'm an offensive line coach or an OC, I at least give him the opportunity to try tackle first. I know I think he going into 2018 was considered to be a little bit higher rated than he is now. I don't have a 1st round grade on him, but I know some people think more highly of him than I do. I think if the Steelers were to look at offensive line early, I do think it would still be on the interior, just because of the fact that Pouncey hasn't been reliable for his health over the years. I mean, the past 2 seasons, he's been, dead on. He hasn't missed much time, if any. I don't think he missed any games last year, and he might have missed one the year before. He's been back in the all-pro form that we've seen him be his entire career. But to that end, he still is getting older. He's on the wrong side of 30 at this point. And there's a chance that, he ends up falling off sooner rather than later. I don't think that happens, but you never know. And then you have Foster, who's under a 2-year deal, and I think that will be his last contract. So I think once he's done, played that out, he's gone. So he'll be 35 at that point, or 34. And then, he'll be probably regressing a little bit more. I mean, he's still playing at a high level right now, so that's why I was more than okay with keeping that contract extended with him. And then Finney, I think Finney stays longer term. I just think they want to see where everything goes this year, because he's on that 1-year tender. If Foster ends up progressing, they can bump him up and try to work him out a longer term deal. But I still think it wouldn't hurt to add a body on the interior. I just don't think that if they're going to, it's going to be this year. And I know I've taken some slack on Twitter. I'm not that high on this interior offensive line class. I think there's good guys like Garrett Bradbury from.
Wait a minute. You took some slack on Twitter. I mean,
I know it's amazing.
Everybody, isn't it? Everyone thinks their draft is the proper one, and that their rankings are the only way it should go, and everyone else is stupid, a moron, and doesn't know what they're talking about. Although, we're pretty much saying the same thing about the people picking offensive line, except for the fact that we actually know what we're talking about with the Steelers.
Yeah, I think the people that pick the offensive line for the Steelers, it's less about them. Not knowing the prospects and more about them not knowing what the Steelers' actual needs are, especially when you looked at the other players that are available on the board. I mean, in that mock draft, Byron Murphy was still available. I'm not a big fan of Greedy Williams, but he was still available. TJ Hawkinson was still available. You can't tell me that you're going to take Greg Little to be potentially your 5th tight offensive tackle just because of the fact that he's your BPA. I don't buy that, but I think, there's a couple guys like Garrett Bradbury, Chris Lindstrom and whatnot who I'd be fine with being on the Steelers long term, but I just don't think that with the needs the Steelers do have still to address, and there's no fit for them at this point in time either, since DeCaster's not going anywhere, Pouncey's not going anywhere, and Foster's not going anywhere. You're more so preparing for the future at that point, but I think you can afford to wait 1 more year before you really fully address that.
No, you're absolutely right. Maybe even more than a year or 2, depending on which position you're looking at. And why not shore up these other spots and then put yourself back into the luxury of best player available, which we didn't think was a luxury initially with all this Antonio Brown chaos. Everybody's looking for who's going to be opposite Joe Hayden. It can't be Artie Burns. Would they really re-sign Cody Sensabaugh, which, he didn't have a terrible year, but we know he's not the answer. And whenever, like you said, it's a business, somebody comes along and you feel they're an upgrade based on what you already have, you're going to pull the trigger if you can. And that was Steven Nelson. So I think that may have shifted corner a little bit. But I think corner is still a priority. We're going to talk about that in a second, because I think our top priority, I know everybody, it's the elephant in the room. It's the let's replace Ryan Shazier. Ryan Shazier, I put Ryan Shazier in the category of a player, even though he didn't have necessarily he was a younger career, so he didn't have quite the accolades of a Troy Polamalu. But these are guys that are unique talents that just you simply don't replace. You find another guy who has unique talents and then work to those talents, which is something like you're always saying too. You don't work to someone's weaknesses or put them in if they're a bad fit, don't put them here, put them there instead. You know what I mean? And that's what these teams are looking at. That's what they're scouting. Does it fit the Steelers system? So with that still in mind, inside linebacker is still a problem. Vince Williams, we know, has been asked to do a lot of things that maybe aren't his forte or his strengths. It's made him look maybe not as good as a player as if he were to, let's put it this way, when that was shake and bake, when it was him and Shazier, we weren't having this conversation about Vince Williams. So you got to find somebody else that's next to him. LJ Fort's out of town now. I highly doubt that Tyler Matakevich is the guy. Mark Barron could be the guy. Mark Barron is a guy like last year with John Bostic that's being brought in to maybe hope that, okay, if we don't have one of these inside linebackers follow us at pick number 20, let's say that's their top priority on the board, and are they going to do one of these deals where they draft for need? Well, they don't have to do that. They've been bitten with this before. A lot of people call Bud Dupree a bust. I just say he's average. nothing spectacular, but definitely not Jarvis Jones. Jarvis Jones, Artie Burns regressed gratefully. That was also a draft for need, like Jarvis Jones was, like Bud Dupree is, and like let's face it, TJ Watt was also a draft for need. There's one that actually worked. Now everything's almost draft for need, but you know what I mean. We need this so bad that we're going to take this with our first pick no matter what and no matter who is there. And I don't know, sometimes some of that happens where there's a couple guys you have, and then all of a sudden, boom, 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 within a couple minutes, they're off the board. And now you're racing to update this, and you're on the clock, and there's a lot of pressure there too. So, you're trying to put all of these months of research, the whole year of research. I'm sure they see tape on other players that aren't even coming out yet that they're going to use when they come out next year, things of that nature. You're trying to process all of this and make the best fit for your team. What Mark Barron, Dante Moncrief, bringing Eli Rogers back, Steven Nelson, what these guys do is it allows the Steelers to focus on other positions. But I still think inside linebacker is going to be the top priority. And I know what you're going to say, so let's throw some names out there. I think the Steelers have to be all in on one of the two Devins, Devin Bush or Devin White. I think I don't want to put words in your mouth just yet, but I think we like Devin Bush better. And then you could tell us about Mac Wilson that everyone's trying to convince us that he's a Steeler, and you're saying not so much.
No, Devin White has been my inside linebacker one since the get-go of this entire process. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say he's a perfect prospect because I do think he has a high level of bust potential, but his arrow is pointing in the extraordinarily right direction. And he has all pro potential. I mean, that's just going to call what it is. He very easily could be average when it's all said and done because he's still learning the position. He's a former running back turned inside linebacker, and you can tell that when he plays, there's a lot of hesitation. I've criticized him a lot because of his lack of cerebral play, but I mean, he's a dude that if he can get in there, he makes splash plays. He's athletic, sideline ability, coverage, playing the run. If you wanted him to do something, he can do it, and he's kind of what you see in those new Mike linebackers nowadays where they can run around the field and just be free and do their thing. Devin Bush is a guy that I've came on as of late. I was very critical of him early on because the thing I'm still the most critical on is I don't think he's a pure run defender. But as you mentioned, and as I've said before, you have a guy like Vince Williams and Ryan Shazier. Ryan Shazier could do whatever the hell he wants to do and go back in coverage, defend the tight ends, cover short zone areas. But then you have Vince Williams to go and be the box defender. He could come up there tight. He can blitz on third down. It's where you have a role for him there. And he can be a run defender and come up and just stonewall guys in the hole, in the gaps. And we've seen him do that. And I think a guy like Devin Bush gives you a lot of that dynamic back where you can go allow Vince Williams to use his strengths, blitz the quarterback, stop the run, cover even some running backs out of the backfield and whatnot, but then have Devin Bush go and kind of cover in the back end because I don't like the way he comes up on the inside. I think if he's a blitzer, he's very good at blitzing if he comes free. If he has the opportunity to get locked up by an offensive lineman, he doesn't do that well getting off of it, and that's a big concern I have. But the Steelers have a D-line that can allow him to get in those one-on-no situations where he can just blitz freely. And if that happens, then you have a very electrifying playmaker there. But Mac Wilson, I'm not budging on this, and no one on Twitter is going to make me budge on this. I don't.
The commenters are going to love this. Just hold on to your seats.
I'm sure. I don't like Mac Wilson. I don't want to see him in Pittsburgh unless it's like as a third round pick. I think I don't look a whole lot at the combine numbers, but I mean the 4.7s for a guy that people were trying to tell me on Twitter is the most athletic linebacker in this class. I mean, come on. You have Devin Bush who ran a 4.42 and Devin White who ran a 4. I don't even know how low, but ridiculously low. And then you have Mac Wilson come out there, whether it was an injury or what. A 4.7 does not make me feel comfortable because he hits hard, he comes downhill in a hurry, but there's this stigma around Alabama inside linebackers that I think really distorts how we view middle linebacker prospects. Because I think you look at him, for one, I think he's the worst Alabama inside linebacker to come out since, Rolando McClain kind of started that trend a couple years back. But I think you look at guys like C.J. Mosley, you look at Rolando McClain, you look at Reuben Foster, you look at Rashawn Evans. For whatever reason, these guys are all decent linebackers, but other than C.J. Mosley, which one of them has really been a dude in the NFL? I don't think any of them. So I'm not really sure where this Stigmas came from. I mean, we see Alabama, they're this polarizing school. They have polarizing prospects. They're pumping out first-round picks like it's their job, because essentially at this point it is Nick Saban's job, championships and first-round picks. But I think there's a stigma because of that we look at Mack Wilson saying, oh, well, he's the next linebacker, so clearly he's going to be good. And he very well might be. But there's been nothing on the tape other than his ability to come downhill and hit hard that makes me really want to get on board with liking him, especially for a team that needs an inside linebacker to make an impact. I think Mack Wilson, for me, and I'm sure I'll take flack on this, I think his ceiling is average starter in the NFL with a high special teams impact, but his floor is a bust. I mean, that's just my opinion on. Obviously, every prospect has a floor of a bust, but some guys you feel worse about than others. And for me, Wilson fits that stereotype of another linebacker that comes in the league that gets looked at for a couple splash plays he made in college. And he does do some things well. He's not bad against the run. He does halfway decently in coverage, but of the three of them, I think he needs the most work. He's the most shaky above the shoulders as far as I'm concerned. And he's not my pick. I mean, I'm sure a lot of Steelers fans like him. I know for a fact some do, because I know there's some that, for whatever reason, have had him be their top linebacker, which I just think is a complete disrespect to Devin White and Devin Bush to an extent. I think Devin Bush is closer to White than Wilson is, but I'm just not a fan. I don't think he's there, and I think we allow our previous stigmas towards certain schools and their athletes to get in the way. And I'm not as big on Alabama linebackers. I think C.J. Mosley is the best one out of all those Bama linebackers to come back, and I think it's an unpopular opinion. I don't think he's anything more than a top 8, maybe middle linebacker in the league, top 5.
I agree. I think he's very grabby, penalized a lot in the pass game. I think he gets away with some too. Some of that may just be with the Ravens D. It'll be interesting to see what he does with the Jets now. I mean, he may disappear into the oblivion.
Yeah, and if he does that, and we're going to still sit here and say that Alabama pumps out all these elite linebackers. I mean, other than him, I wanted Rashaan Evans last year too, but he didn't do anything last year. Ron McClain, it took him bouncing around the league to find a somewhat steady home, and then he finally kind of was average at that point. He was a starter. And you have, like I said, Reuben Foster, who knows when he's going to play again. I mean, he was good when he was on the field, but there's really no way of gauging how good he would be with all the off-field issues. So, I think Mack Wilson falls in line with the rest of them. I think he's a polarizing prospect that realistically is never going to be a elite player. And I hope he proves me wrong, because I never want to sit here and bash a player and say they can't be something, but I just don't see that upside with him.
Yeah, and I mean, even I'm looking over last year, last year, Malik Jefferson. A lot of people had a lot higher, and he fell into the third round. And here's a guy who ran a 4.52. So
did nothing with Cincy. Did nothing.
Yeah, and did nothing there either. And a lot of people were upset with the Steelers not making that certain pick. And I mean, by all means, if Wilson were a third round pick, I don't think either of us would argue. A lot of people would say, "Oh, you're going back on that." We're just saying, hey, don't jump the gun and, for need, don't take this guy for need, or you may end up with another Jarvis Jones, Artie Burns type of situation. You don't want to reach for need in the top spot. And the reason they would need to reach for an inside linebacker is if either Devin White or Devin Bush are off the board at pick 20. So that is the follow-up question here is, what do you do now if, let's say, those are the top 2 guys? The Steelers absolutely say, these are the top 2 guys on our board. This will fit or fill a tremendous need with our team. It's pretty much the way we kind of feel. Now where do you go from here? There may be some later round type stuff. A lot of people are still like, hey, you need to find somebody else to pair with TJ Watt, an edge rusher. Is there any edge rusher that you would basically look at? And just so people understand, edge rusher, it could be a guy who played defensive end in college, maybe in a 4-3, but is now going to kick out to standing up as an outside linebacker in a Steelers 3-4, any of these hybrid sub packages that they have. So basically what you're looking at is Bud Dupree is in his 5th year being paid a lot of money, and he's an athlete. And the reason I say disappointing is that now that we've come to the $9 million plus that he's owed this year, I don't feel that that's the proper salary for what he's shown. Up until this point, rookie contract, some injuries, I've been willing to give him a pass. I also realize, too, that Keith Butler isn't throwing Kevin Green, Greg Lloyd, Joey Porter, James Harrison, Lamar Woodley all the time, rush at the passer. It's not the way the Steelers defense works anymore. So I'm willing to give Bud Dupree a pass there because I know how much he drops into coverage. But seeing as the way the Steelers use an outside linebacker in that manner, and they use TJ Watt the same way too. TJ Watt's just a little more successful getting to the quarterback. I have to pull back on that a little bit because you look at some of the quarterbacks he's sacked, like Deshaun Kaiser, and it's just kind of like, okay, this isn't apples to apples here when he gets to some of these rookies or poor quarterbacks too. But for all intents and purposes, we could say that he's more successful than Bud Dupree at this point when comparing their careers. But I digress. TJ Watt also drops into coverage an awful lot. We've seen him cover like Jordy Nelson or Keenan Allen or somebody like that, and you're scratching your head as to how that happens. And some of it's miscommunications, some of it, I hate to say it's by design, but I think it just kind of happens that way, filling their roles or being aware of what's there in their zone. So you need to find a guy that's kind of like that, and I'm not sure there's a guy that's like that the Steelers are willing to spend a pick on at pick 20.
Yeah, I mean, it's for one, I agree with people that say that Bud Dupree isn't worth the $9.2 million per year, whatever the exact figures are for it. But I think realistically, what I'm excited to actually see, and this might turn some people's heads a little bit, having a guy like Keith Butler back at the outside linebacker spot as well as D coordinator. I mean, people seem to forget that even though he might not be the greatest D coordinator, he was the reason a lot of those edge rushers in Pittsburgh became good. I mean, he was the outside linebackers coach, the linebackers coach period for what, 11 years, 12 years during that Cowher Tomlin era. And I think he can bring a little bit more out of there. But I think realistically, there's not a whole lot of edges there. I know Chase Winovich has gotten a lot of talk as of late due to the Steelers' very open interest in him. Mm-hmm. I'm not a huge fan of him in the first round. I think he's a very good second pick, but at the same time, I don't think he's there in the second round for the Steelers. I think if he goes, because he's a scheme versatile dude, he could play with his hand in the dirt or play standing up. I don't know if he's going to be there. So I think if the Steelers want him, they have to take him in the first round, but I think that is a bit of a reach for them.
Well, at pick 20, right? I mean, this is like a TJ Watt situation where a lot of people were like, "Oh, they took Watt in the first round." Well, it was like what, pick 28? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
so like if you like, and I've always been a proponent, if you like the guy and you don't think he's going to be there by the end of the round or by the within 10, 15 picks, I know it might be a little bit of a reach, but if he's the dude you want, you take him. Same thing with Terrell Edmonds. I know a lot of people criticize the Steelers taking Terrell Edmonds because draft Twitter had him as a second or third round grade, but the rumors were coming out that a lot of teams had a first round grade on him, and a lot of teams valued him and were going to take him in the top of the second round. The teams that were picking early in the first because they liked his skill set and they liked his talent, so the Steelers pulled the trigger and took him. Yes. So Chase Winovich fits that profile, and a lot of teams value him highly because teams know this stuff. The teams know where other teams feel about prospects, and they get out feelers out there and they see where they're pretty much going to think they're going to go. So you have the opportunity to feel that Chase Winovich is going to be gone early, like he's going to be gone within the first round or very early second. It might be a little bit of a reach, but the team, if they like him enough, they're going to take him. That's just the way you draft. You don't draft based upon what draft Twitter thinks. You draft based upon your big board and when you feel players are going to be there. I mean, it's the same thing with Mason Rudolph. The Steelers like Mason Rudolph a lot. They probably would have taken him earlier if they knew that if they felt that he was going to go earlier. But they probably felt, based upon the feelers they had out in the NFL community, that he would be there in the third round, which is why they traded up for him, even though they had a first round grade for him. I think Chase Winovich fits that profile of like a TJ Watt, of a Terrell Edmonds, where if he's going to be there and he's your guy and you feel that the other teams in the league might take him early, then you're going to take him if he's the best player available. And a guy like one of the two Devons, who I do believe are the two targets at this point, are no longer there. And, I don't think edge is the top priority, but again, you have to prepare to improve over Bud Dupree if he doesn't take any strides forward. And you have to prepare for 2020 because you can't just go in with TJ Watt and then, as much as I like Ola Adeniyi and Keon Adams, they have done nothing. They have a combined 9 NFL snaps between the two of them. Do you really want to trust them to all of a sudden, with no experience, just get thrown out there? I understand it's the same concept with a rookie, but a rookie has the pedigree So, we'll see. But I think Chase Winovich is about the only edge rusher there because I think Brian Burns is gone. Montez Sweat's gone. So I think realistically, it's Winovich in the first round or nobody when it comes to edge rushers. And I don't think he's going to be the pick when it's all said and done.
Well, yeah. And, you make several good points here, too, especially the draft Twitter thing. By the way, Edmonds picked 28, TJ Watt picked 30. The draft Twitter people are going to try and shoehorn what they feel is a need. They're trying to cover 32 teams and may not know every team's need to a T or have the, intimate knowledge of following them 365 days a year like we do. And that's where they kind of the disconnect is, where you get like a Greg Little pick in a mock draft because they see that a tackle that was a starting tackle, although he missed 14, 16 games or whatever the heck it was over the 2 years with Marcus Gilbert. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, you know what? We have Greg Little as this top guy. He's the top guy on our thing. And, the Steelers, they lost the starting tackle. So here, we fill him in right here. That's where you get into trouble with some of these things. The teams themselves have to do the type of homework that the draft Twitter guys are supposed to be doing, and they have a little more intimate knowledge on certain things. That's why the Steelers move up ahead of the Bengals in order to get Mason Rudolph. We've seen similar where the Ravens moved ahead of the Steelers to get Max Williams in the past, or you get those type of things where it's like, oh, well, the Steelers really like this guy and they were going to do that. Well, it's their job to kind of to have an idea of, can this guy still be on the board where we're picking? And if not, who would take him? And obviously, within your own division, you're going to know that very well because you see those teams often. And we often see Mike Tomlin and, the Steelers, they pick up players that they played against. Steven Nelson, very good example. They've seen Dante Moncrief a handful of times too. So they get to see these guys up close and personal. Villanueva, preseason. That's happened with some other guys too. Off the top of my head, I don't remember offhand. But, you make a good point with if they're available there. Now, this isn't as late in the first round where I would necessarily call pick 20 a early second round pick where if you're pulling the trigger on, Edmonds or Watt, they're not going to bounce back around to where your next pick is later on. The Steelers, they got a pick, let me see here, not just 20, but I'm looking at round two. They got 52, 66, and then 83. That's where your money's going to be made right there because those picks are pretty close together and they got to have a good feel for who may still be there. Do we take this guy at 52 and risk the other guy not being there at 66? So a pick 20, if it's somebody like a Chase Winovich, I mean, so be it. But I think you and I can maybe agree on there's a couple of other positions that are out there. Let's jump to the offense real quick. Well, you know what? We'll stay with defense. Why not? Cornerback. Cornerback now, Steven Nelson's there, but Steven Nelson's still young. He's 26. Joe Hayden is 29, contract year. Do you feel comfortable enough with the guys that are behind Joe Hayden and Steven Nelson in the event of either injury or player development looking ahead to 2020? If you have a Byron Murphy sitting there at 20, can you possibly go in the direction of what I was going to say, jumping to offense, wide receiver or tight end? And I know I've gotten flamed for the tight end thing. And I think Brian and maybe Tina will jump on with Brian are going to talk a little more about tight ends, so we won't get too in-depth there because you get the two Iowa guys. And, Tina follows Iowa. She's the big Iowa fanatic there. So she has some closer knowledge and some contacts with the team there that they'll talk about in a future show. So, but my point is here, now you don't have an inside linebacker that you like. You don't have an edge rusher that you like. You're not going to go with any of these other positions that we said are completely off the board. So you're looking at corner, wide receiver, and tight end, I guess, as your possibilities. I don't think running back's there at all. Safety, I don't know that they could double dip on safety. Sean Davis is a contract year as well. They got some other younger guys there. They could potentially even fill that need the following season if something doesn't get worked out with him. Kind of the same thing you were saying about Javon Hargrave. So I'm kind of curious what your thought or your take is on corner, because I could definitely see them adding a guy. I kind of think of like something where the Bengals were always adding first-rounders, or even the Ravens with the example of Marlon Humphrey, even though they had, Brandon Carr and Jimmy Smith, they still added Humphrey, and then you look, they don't skip a beat there at that position. I think that might be something that the Steelers may consider if the right guy's there at pick 20.
Yeah, I've been a fan of taking cornerback, especially after all the free agency dust settled a little bit. I know we had that, Eric and I had a discussion, like a colorful discussion on our back room recently. I'm still in the proponent that if both the Devons are gone and Byron Murphy's still on the board, you have to consider taking him. I think especially now, considering the fact that he wouldn't be pressured in the playing time due to the fact you have Steven Nelson, due to the fact you have Joe Hayden, and due to the fact that Mike Hilton is still here for the time being. I think a guy like him, or as much as I hate to say it, I'm not a huge fan of Greedy Williams, but that's the perfect situation for him to go into, a position where he can sit there and sit for a year, or he just gets snaps sparingly here and there to kind of see what it's like to be an NFL corner. Because I do think Greedy Williams, of the cornerbacks in this class, has the highest ceiling. He also has absolutely the lowest floor of all those guys, because I still question his love of the game consistently and his willingness to be a player in all phases of the game, not just whenever the ball is coming his way. But you can't ignore the physical talent, the length, the speed, the ball skills, the coverage skills when he wants to turn it on. And if he was more consistent with his run support, aka even willing to come up and hit a guy, or even just more consistent with his tackling, I think we'd be talking about a guy that would be unquestioned the top cornerback in this class. But Byron Murphy, I think, is the more pro-ready guy. And I just think when you look at those two people, you have the opportunity to give yourself insurance if you don't re-sign Joe Hayden to a long-term deal, or if Steven Nelson, while I think Steven Nelson's going to be fine, you don't know that, and you can't bank on that because of the fact that it's not like Joe Hayden. When the Steelers signed Joe Hayden, he's a former Pro Bowl cornerback. He's been there. He's done that. He started for years. He has the experience, and he just was a cap casualty from a team. That was all. Steven Nelson is in the right direction. His arrow's pointing upward. And I think last year, when he kind of found his home on the outside, he was the only bright spot in that Chiefs secondary, which, isn't saying a whole lot with how porous they were. But when you're missing Eric Berry for most of the year, and you have a guy step up in the way that Nelson stepped up, get bullied by quarterbacks, and then still rise to the occasion, I think that bodes well for him moving forward. And I think you're paying him that type of money, you're going to expect him to come in and be a starter. But I think that gives you at least insurance to have a guy come in and compete, because I'm going to go down swinging with Artie Burns. I'm not going to jump away from there. I think last year was sad, to say the least, for Artie Burns, and I think the Steelers are giving him one last shot. And if he doesn't show any flashes of hope and get his confidence back as a DB, because he just looked lost a lot out there last year, I think if he gets some of that back, you have a potential guy with him, but Brian Allen has yet to make any strides forward and make you think he's ever going to be a legitimate contributor. And I don't really even know who Cam Sutton is at this point in time. Is he a good football player? Isn't he? You don't really know. There's flashes like in his first start as a rookie. He came up against the Patriots in 2017 and he did well. And then there's times last year where he looked like he shouldn't be on a football field. So I still don't really know who he is. And in my mind, Joe Hayden has the injury history. Steven Nelson is not a guaranteed thing at this point in time. Or do you really want to have a situation where you're putting out Cam Sutton, Artie Burns, and Brian Allen as your starting cornerbacks? Not really. So that's why I still think cornerback, if I had to put it in my rank of orders, is number 2 on my list behind inside linebacker, just because of the fact that you need to have insurance and you need to potentially have a long-term option, because Mike Hilton's not guaranteed to be back after 2019. He's not guaranteed to be there now unless he signs his tender. So there's a lot of things that are moving around in that secondary that this could be a very different looking secondary come 2020. And I think the Steelers should be proactive in this draft because it is top heavy at cornerback. There's not a lot of depth in this class. So if they want a cornerback early, they're going to have to go the top 2 rounds as far as I'm concerned, because that's where just naturally where the best talent is, and not waste late round picks on guys, because really the only mid round cornerback I think as late as you could go would be David Long. And I think that's from Michigan. I think he projects better as a slot corner anyway. So you do what you got to do, but I like taking cornerback. I think if you look and both the Devons are gone and Byron Murphy's sitting there for you to take, I think he makes the most sense. And I think because they have Steven Nelson now, I think I've warmed up more to the idea of Greedy Williams, because Greedy Williams has Pro Bowl upside. He has bust downside. And I think not forcing him to play early, you're more likely probably going to see that higher upside work out for him, which for me would be an awesome thing to potentially grab if nothing else was there.
Wow, I agree with everything there, man. And I like to call it the pocket change sub-packages that they have: nickel, dime, dollar, quarter, half dollar, whatever, silver dollar, like whatever you want to call it, man. They're defensive back heavy. So what do you need? You need DBs. I mean, it's not rocket science. So do you really want to put, like you said, Brian Allen or Artie Burns out there? Because, I mean, that's what you got. I mean, I feel somewhat comfortable with Cam Sutton. I think the plays that he's been beaten on, I mean, you're looking at one pro versus another pro, and he's not a full-time guy who's had a whole lot of experience, and he was hurt for a portion of his rookie season too. So, and then, of course, Mike Hilton. There's no guarantees he's going to be around either. So shoring up and strengthening this position or the entire secondary, they added an extra secondary coach. Terrell Austin's there now. And this is because of just how pass happy the NFL is. So if you have an opportunity at that type of talent, I say you got to go for it. I totally agree.
And one more thing there, not to interrupt you, Joe. You can never have, in the pass happy league, you can never have too many cornerbacks. The more cornerbacks you have, the better competition you have, the better you're going to get play on the field.
And, long term, like you're saying, if Joe Hayden gets another contract, likely his last, he'll be signing a contract at age 30. What's he got? 2-3 years? I mean, it's not, even look at Richard Sherman. These guys start to, it's just father time catches up. I mean, that's all the more you could say, especially at certain positions versus others. I said earlier that Cam Hayward was 29, but you know what? A defensive end, he could play until he's like 36, 37, you know what I mean? If he chooses to, and, of course, age could catch up to him as well, but less likely because, you know what, we're not looking at what his 40 time is versus, these corners got to keep up with these young bucks now that come on the field, rookie second-year players that are speedsters and aren't. It's very rare to have a guy that's 30 years old and run as fast as Darius Hayward-Bay. So that's pretty much it. I was going to say, man, I mean, you got to have defensive backs because all of these teams in the NFL, they're passing a lot. They're always adding weapons. The Oakland Raiders, you look at a team like that now, and they add another weapon. Breaking news. I don't know if you just saw this or not, Zach. I'm already on the Twitter. And it's the Raiders signed the GOAT, Landry Jones, former backup quarterback, heir apparent to Ben Roth. People are just shutting off the thing now. But I said that, this is the move I've been waiting for. Gruden, he's just adding. First he adds Nate Peterman. Then he adds Mike Glennon. They get rid of A.J. McCarron. And now this quarterback room is full. He's got Landry Jones. He now has all the ammo he needs to trade Derek Carr. I mean, it is a reunion of Landry Jones. There's no doubt in my mind that Antonio Brown spoke up for Landry Jones, felt it was an injustice that he wasn't playing football last year, and made sure he got a job with his new team. I mean, this is a very stand-up thing. I know I've disagreed with a lot of what Antonio Brown has put out there in recent weeks and months, but I mean, this is a really good thing that he has done for a former teammate of his, and I'm very excited to see, the quarterback competition because, Derek Carr I don't think is very strong, and there's a very high possibility that Landry Jones could supersede him as the starter in Oakland. And if no one is getting the sarcasm from all of this, they must not have heard me be a Landry Jones truther in the past around this time, even last year. So I thought they would keep 4 quarterbacks last year. You were talking about that with the guy's name I butchered, Rogan Broback. I'm going to have to remember that now. I think I called him Kevin something. I was thinking
you call him Kevin.
I was thinking of Kevin Hogan, who used to play with the Browns. That's what it was. But you know what? We're not going to talk too much about the tight end thing. I think we think tight end could be a possibility there. I'm going to throw a bone and leave it to Brian and Tina since we're running a little long on this episode. A lot of people are like, tight end over? Well, we've already told you, if inside linebacker's not there, if an edge rusher is more than likely out of the question that early, unless you got to pull the trigger on somebody like a Chase Winovich that they may have the puppy dog eyes for. We don't know. Then there's the wide receiver spot we're going to talk about here. I don't know. You could, in theory, get somebody, but you still got James Washington you're developing. You still got Dante Moncrief. You still got the shifty slot guys with Ryan Switzer and Eli Rogers. And then you still also have Juju Smith-Schuster. Well, you don't necessarily know that James Washington's the answer. You're counting on a 2-year deal with Dante Moncrief. My argument in placing tight end in with the same conversation as wide receiver is that you're weak at tight end and you have a guy in Vance McDonald that hasn't always been healthy in the past. He has injury history. The only other guy there is Xavier Grimble. And if you have somebody that could be a vertical threat and be an upgrade of a blocker, a lot of people feel Jesse James, oh, they let him go. Well, for what the Detroit Lions are paying him, I think Steelers Nation would have been irate if you would have given that kind of money to Jesse James. He's a guy that hasn't necessarily been the best blocker, and he's a guy that pretty much gets tackled as soon as he makes the catch. Great possession receiver, a guy I wish a lot of luck to. I'll still say that Jesse caught it, but there could be an upgrade there. So I almost view a tight end. I used to do this when I even drafted fantasy football. There's certain guys like a Gronk or Jimmy Graham in his prime, or not a whole lot of others you could put in that same category that I feel could put up wide receiver production. So if it's there, what do you feel about adding a piece on the offensive side of the ball at pick 20? Would you do it over the defense? I don't know. In this case, if the linebackers are there, got to go linebacker. If one of the corners is there, very comfortable with that. This one might be a risky pick.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the offensive side of the ball, the only receiver that I think really would make sense in the first round being N'Keal Harry from Arizona State. He's really the only one. I know Brian's going to be upset. I'm not putting DK Metcalf in that conversation. So sorry, Brian.
He's not going to be there. At pick
he's
20.
not going to be there. And I also, as good as he tested, I think he's more of a, and there's nothing wrong with this, he's a one-trick pony. He does that one trick or couple tricks very extraordinarily well, and that's going to be his key and bread and butter in the NFL. He's never going to be a pure route runner. He's going to be a guy that you just let his 4.3 speed go over the top and just be stronger and more physical than the DB and catch the ball. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. You can base a career off of that, put up gaudy numbers, and be an all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber receiver. No problem with that. I just think for the Steelers offense, they need more of a versatile guy who can play outside, play inside, to kind of take some pressure off of Juju. So I think N'Keal Harry is really the only guy that I view as a first-round receiver. I know Hakeem Butler has gotten a lot of talk. I don't view Hakeem Butler as a first-round pick, at least not at 20. I think he's a late first, early second guy. But I know I've taken slack for it. I'm still concerned about the drops. We have no idea projection. But you look at guys in the past that have had reported issues with drops due to concentration and focus. I mean, you're putting him in a conversation there with Limas Swede, which Steelers fans should know extraordinarily well. You're putting him in a conversation with Rashad Perriman. Guys who had concentration issues and focus issues that led to a lot of drops. That's not something that's easily coachable and leads to some short careers. I'm not saying that's going to be like Hakeem Butler, because Hakeem Butler has a skill set you can't teach. The dude's 6'6". He runs a 4.47 or 4.52, something in that ballpark. Very fast for a guy his size. He's physical, big hands, long wingspan. Like, you can't teach those core traits. So if I'm a team, I'm taking a risk on that. But I don't think he's a surefire prospect. When you have those drop numbers, I don't think that makes you a early to mid first round pick. So I think if anything, he's a late first, early second guy. And I think the best value for some of these receivers the Steelers would need would be in the mid rounds, because they don't need to take a guy early. You still have Juju. I'm confident that James Washington's going to continue taking steps forward. We saw the flashes in preseason and training camp with Ben against number one DBs. He made a couple nice catches on Joe Hayden, a couple nice catches on Cody Sensabaugh during the preseason. I think there's reason to believe that he'll continue progressing forward, especially as Ben keeps working with him. Our terrible leader, Ben Roethlisberger, once he continues working with them a little bit more, I think you have the opportunity to get him some more reps, get him some more looks. Dante Moncrief, I think his time with Jacksonville last year was a flash in the pan. I think what he's capable of is more indicative to what we saw when he was in Indianapolis. So you have a guy that could potentially play X. He did very well on 3x1 sets where he was the X receiver on the one side. I think he could do well, and you still have Ryan Switzer who could play more outside if he wants to. And I think Eli Rogers is a very good slot receiver. So you don't have to pull the trigger on a receiver early. You can wait until day 2, day 3, and there's a lot of value in this class. I know everyone's talking about the 2020 receiver class, but 2019 is a very deep and very good receiver class. If there's a type of receiver you want, he's there. So I don't think the Steelers should feel pressured to take a receiver in the first round, even if DK Metcalf would be there. So I wouldn't be mad about taking a receiver. I'd be more inclined to go with tight end, because this is a very top heavy and a very deep tight end class. But I struggle to see a way that offense is a first-round target this year. I think it's a very easy day 2 target. I think receiver on day 2 makes a ton of sense. We've seen them take a receiver in the second round now 2 years in a row, and they trend the dough in that range anyway. And I just don't think receiver is a Steelers style for first round. I mean, they took Santonio Holmes, sure. They took Plexico Burris, sure. But they've had so much success on day 2 and day 3 guys. I don't think they're going to be pulling and rushing to pull the trigger on a day 1 first round receiver this year, even with the departure of AB, because I don't think you have to replace AB with AB. I think you can still have success with other receivers and just change your offense to the strengths of the guys you have that's there. Be more balanced when you have James Conner. So I don't think it's a reason to rush to get a first round receiver by any means.
That's a very good point about day 2s. Even Hines Ward, Juju, most recently, not first-round picks. And one of our loyal, commenters over on the website, I had a very similar article that was up over there on this topic. And Jamie says, he's talking about Vance McDonald being a fine starter and injury-prone, which we met. He says, this is great. Grimble's best play cost us a trip to the playoffs, so I don't ever need to see him on the field. So he goes, when McDonald goes down, I could see no tight end sets, combination of 2 slot receivers, or Nix at fullback. Or, maybe we get Jalen Samuels out there a little more because, he's played all those positions. He was a tight end and an H-back and all these other things. What was it? Not offensive weapon, because that was the guy from Michigan that played for Jacksonville. But they had I think they just called him an H at NC State. Yeah. Not even H-back. I think it was just H.
That's role on offense.
So because they didn't know what he did. All he did was score touchdowns. And he was doing that at the end of the year for the Steelers too. Maybe they find other ways to incorporate him. So what we're saying is it's very flexible here, because what you could end up having is, and if you say DK Metcalf's there at 20, I know Brian's pounding his fists to run to the podium. I think they're going to have like 4 or 5 phone calls and provided one of the 2 Devons, or maybe Murphy, maybe, I don't know if Greedy's gone by then, maybe he's not, and they feel maybe he'll slide back a few spots. You could very well see a scenario where the Steelers maybe flip back with one of these teams a little later. Who's hungry for like a wide receiver is like the New Orleans Saints, and they've been known to make some moves as well in the draft. And I don't know exactly what all they have left, but you could have a scenario like that. Maybe the Steelers may acquire an extra pick or something, and then it makes sense to have a late first rounder for maybe an edge rusher or something else. Mm-hmm. These are all very much possibilities, and I think their phone would be ringing. But we're up against it. So Zach, the professor, thanks once again for joining me on the program, and I'm sure your hot takes have got a lot of seats on fire. There's going to be some people itching to comment.
I look forward to reading the comment sections and getting attacked on Twitter per usual, day in the life.
Yes, and if you don't see Zach around on Twitter, you could find it probably somewhere either in the show notes. Tell us your Twitter handle, because I can never remember the thing.
Yeah, it's at GZ Sports, GZSPORTS_ZM.
Yeah, it's a mouthful there. It's the alphabet soup. But you know what? You start to type it, you'll see we're retweeting each other all the time. And, he's on one of our lists there on Twitter, too. So you'll find him or look in the show notes, too. So until next time, my name is Joe. His name is Zach. We encourage all our listeners to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.